So, hello and welcome to Real Estate Real Home Stories. I'm Sue Curlett and I'm here with John Smith, my co host, and Nicole Church with Lakeside Title. We are going to be talking to you today about title and what the importances are when you are recording your property and the best way to record it, things like that. So, Nicole, we're going to come at you today. We're going to throw some questions your way and then just, answer them as simply as you can, if you don't
Okay.
mind, just so that anybody listening can understand exactly what matters. Now, Nicole and I have worked together for the last 20 years. And so she knows enough to tell you basically everything that you're going to need through the title process. Um, Title is the last step. Once we're under contract, then the contract goes to the title officer. The title officer is processing everything in the background to make sure that you legally record the house in your name when you go to closing. So, Nicole, you cover what areas? Give us an idea of exactly what areas Lakeside covers.
Washington, D.C., Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania.
Excellent. When we're talking about title, there's so many things that come into play, Nicole, that people need to understand. And one of those things, most importantly, I believe, is when you buy the house, right? And you add someone to title that may not be on the loan. Are you
Okay.
following me? Okay, so we've run into various situations, and I'll share a story just to tweak your interest, Nicole. If you remember back the lady that bought her house, and I talked about this on another podcast, but remember the lady that bought her house that had dated her boyfriend for 3 weeks? Do you remember the one?
No.
Yeah, it was a few years back. It was in Carroll County, and she bought her house with her boyfriend of 3 weeks, and she added him to title. And like literally, yeah, added him. They weren't married, so she added him so that he would inherit the property if something happened to her. So tell us a little bit about that and how that can happen.
So when you decide that you want to add someone to your deed, there's a couple of things that happen. Depending on the reasoning why you want to add them is going to depend on how you're taking title together. So if Sue and I, like if you and I are owning a property and I just want to make sure if I die, you actually get the property without having to worry about my estate or whether or not I have a will, then there's a specific, what's called tenancy that comes into play where, if you hold title as a joint tenant with a right of survivorship clause, then yes, if I die, then Sue, you're going to get the property. And who cares if I have a will or who cares if an estate is opened? Now, sometimes people will, for other reasons, add someone to a deed, and it's not necessarily an estate planning thing,
Right.
but you can hold title together as something called joint tenants. There is no survivorship clause. You literally own 50%, Sue, and I literally own 50%. And if I wanted to, I can sell my 50% to John, and you have no say. And all of a sudden, you
Right.
and John are now property owners. But, there's still a lot of moving parts that you have to pay attention to because, if you're buying property with someone that you don't know very well, like the boyfriend of 3 weeks,
Yeah.
if he incurs any judgments, those judgments are going to attach to that property and can affect you when you go to sell or refinance. So it is
Wow.
super,
Okay.
super important when you're determining on adding someone to a deed that you're taking into consideration their, as far as like, are they fiscally responsible?
Right. Right. So basically, if my boyfriend of 3 weeks chooses to is in a car accident, God forbid, and somebody sues him, and there's a judgment for $100,000 against him, if he is on the house, then that 100,000 is coming out regardless of whether he's on the loan or not.
Correct.
He Okay, so super important to note, guys, that if you are buying a house with someone that you're not married to, and we'll get into that in a minute, but if you're buying a house with someone that you're not married to, then you literally take on their mistakes as well. If you break up and you're on the loan, how do you get them off title? They have to agree to come off, or how do you break up with somebody that's not on the loan but on the title?
It's going to take buying someone out, and that's
Okay.
oftentimes what happens. But here's
Yeah.
something that you have to pay attention to. We were kind of talking about the judgment scenario.
Yeah.
If you and I own a property together and you and I have a falling out, and one of us, we decide to redo a deed and take one of our names off, if the person who's been removed had a judgment filed against them, the judgment doesn't leave just because their name gets removed from the deed. That judgment
Ah,
stays. So if I have a car
wow.
accident and I'm sued, and you and I decide that I need to come off of that deed, you're still stuck with my judgment from that car accident.
Wow.
I call that the left behind present.
Oh, the
Oh my
gift that keeps
gosh,
on
right?
giving.
I've never thought about that, Nicole.
Yes.
So, every podcast that we do, John and I are like, huh? What? And we've been doing this for so long, but we are learning. So, our listeners definitely are learning. And it just matters. It matters so much right now, because how many times, John, do we see people, and Nicole, buying houses on WED, right? And then they're buying this house together. So, I mean, I have literally like gone dun 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 dun
Yeah.
to people that are sitting down, because they might not be married, but guess what? Now you are. It's harder to get out of that, or maybe more costly to get out of that home ownership than it is to get out of your wedding, out of your marriage.
And I have to be honest, I've had situations before where two individuals enter into a contract of sale to purchase a home that are
Yeah.
not married.
Yeah.
And something happens between the day that they signed that contract and settlement and they broke up. Guess what? You are
They're buying.
contractually obligated to buy
Yes.
that property.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, buyers, it's so important that you
Yeah.
know every in and out. And that's what we're trying to do with this podcast. I know we keep telling you, but if you're listening to this, our whole goal is to educate you and provide you with the information that you need to be able to make an educated decision. I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to be educated if you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a house. And I don't know when the last time, I don't know, honestly, I don't know if I've ever sold a house that's less than $100,000. I
Yeah.
really don't know. I don't think I have. So we're not talking chump change, right? We're talking
Right.
about a purchase that is going to be a major investment into your future. And you just got to know what's going to happen. So, Nicole, I don't want to talk specifically about Maryland and Pennsylvania or Delaware, like anything, but we're kind of left without an option. So listeners, John is licensed in Maryland. I'm licensed in Maryland and PA. So when we're talking to Nicole, it might change per state. So we'll just ask you to specify if you're talking specifically about Maryland or Pennsylvania. They're
Okay.
pretty much the same as far as title goes, right?
Correct.
Okay. So it may not matter, but if you're in Florida and you're listening, or Colorado, we have no idea what your title laws are in those states. So, generally everything's going to be the same, with the exception of maybe the escrow or closing, or whether it's going to be through a title officer or attorney. So we'll try to be as general as we can, but if we say something Maryland specific, don't hold it against us. Basically, just let it go. So Nicole, when someone's married, there is tenancy by the entirety, right? And that
Correct.
is basically what? Explain that to us.
So tenants by the entireties is a type of it's called a vesting. It's how you hold title together that is specifically reserved for married individuals. If you and I are married, we hold title as tenants by the entireties. If I die, once again, there's that survivorship clause. You automatically gain 100% ownership to the property. Now, people might say, well, wait a second. She said something about the joint tenants with right of survivorship. So how is that different? The unique feature of tenants by the entireties is there is a protection against judgments. If you and I are married and you have a car accident and a judgment is filed against you as a result, the judgment does not attach to the property. The judgment
Wow.
needs to be filed against both of us jointly in order for that to attach. Now, the only caveat to that rule are tax liens. Maryland, I shouldn't say Maryland, state and federal tax liens, they trump everything. That can be
Okay.
filed against just you, both of us, it doesn't matter, it would attach regardless. But any other type of judgment, your property would be protected unless that judgment were filed against both of us together.
Now, let me ask you this, because my husband and I have owned separate property. So I've owned a house, he's owned a house. Would that apply just because we're married, even if I wasn't on title? What we're saying is, guys, that if you are married and you're not on title, that it's not an automatic win for you. You're not automatically
Right.
going to inherit that property. So, good thing to know. If you're tenants in common, right? Is that what we were talking about at first? That would be like friends buying summer property together, and it's 50-50. And if I die, then my family inherits my 50% and your family inherits the other 50%. So, that basically breaks down tenancy.
I got 1,000 of these title related stories, but I like this one.
Okay.
When I find out that the parties split up, they took title, tenants by entirety. The relationship didn't work out. They decided to split up.
Yeah.
And so either with consideration or without, one party decides to take their name off of title. However, they didn't address the mortgage. Now, party who decided for either no consideration or small consideration now lives in Florida. Only to find out that his old spouse defaulted on the loan.
Oh, right.
I see it all the time. Here's
wasn't
where I
even
don't
thinking
know.
about
I
that.
signed
Yeah.
off on the deed. I'm like, the mortgage showed up on your credit, buddy.
Right.
I don't know that. I gave her the house.
Yeah, she got the house in the divorce or whatever,
And
but
you
didn't come
got
off the
you
mortgage.
got 50
Right.
50% of the foreclosure too.
Wow. So this is why we're doing this, because these are things that we don't think about every day and you're never going to think about, but you really do need to know, and you need to make sure that that you're prepared. When people purchase property together, you're basically marrying that person, whether it's
Right.
legal or not. You are basically committing your life, or at least your money that you're putting forth with that person. If you're married, it's tenants by the entirety. In the state of Maryland, that's automatic, right?
Mhm.
So,
Or is that not? So that's automatic.
so my second story has to
Yeah.
do with our illustrious young folk
Okay,
Yep.
come on, young people.
who decide, and
Yeah.
she's grinning, decide we're going to buy a house together. Oh,
Yep.
really? Okay. So you guys are about to make a pledge for 30 years
Right.
to the lender, but
So
you guys
common.
don't even know if you'll be together in 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we run into couples that buy before they're married. I did. I bought my first house with my husband before we were married. I mean, we were engaged and it was a couple months before, but
Yours worked out.
really understand what you're doing, guys. Understand what you're doing, because that might not be the day you say I do to the priest, but it is the day that you say I do to your finances for the next 30 years. So I guess that's the point we're trying to make. I'll be honest with you. If one of my kids came to me and I had any say in it at all, which, obviously I wouldn't, because they'd all tell me to jump in the lake, but if my daughter came and said, I'm going to buy this house with my boyfriend, I would be like, okay, is that a need? Can we look at him buying the house and you getting added after the fact, after you're married, whatever? A lot of people we run into, and I've seen over the years, are so offended that they're not on title.
Yeah.
But there are pros to not being on title. if one of you can buy the house, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, but if one of you can buy the house and God forbid some medical ailment or you lose your job or whatever, that other person's credit is still available.
Correct.
So, there's no reason for both of you to be on title if you have a will or if you have planned on, something mysteriously happening to you. Your wife can still, or your husband can still have the property. You just need to tell your title officer or the attorney handling your closing that you want it to be recorded. And then you also have a will that's going to leave your personal property or your real estate property to that person.
Correct.
So that way, God forbid something happens, you never know. I mean, look at, we're all a serious heart attack away. So, it's something to really think about if you can, to just buy it for yourself.
Well, and here's another thing that actually you made me think about just now. For
Okay.
our clients that are buying the houses that are not married, when they're
Yeah.
taking title, and then a year later they get married, that tenancy or how you're holding title doesn't automatically go from joint tenants or tenants in common to that tenants by the entireties. You actually have to refile a new deed to upgrade, if you will, that tenancy or how you're holding title together. So again, you and I buy a house, we're not married, we're just holding title as tenants, tenants in common or even joint tenants. Well,
Right.
once you and I get married, that tenancy still stays the same. And remember, tenants by the entireties is reserved specific for married individuals, and it has that financial protection attached to it. So it definitely pays, if you're buying a home with someone and you're unmarried, to have your deed updated once you are married to include that new tenancy.
Because, and let's just say that you pass away, right? And your tenants in common.
Yeah.
That might go to your parents or your kids. So your spouse that you married after the fact may not receive that half of the house.
Correct.
Could happen, right? Like, and probably has happened. It hasn't happened to me, but I'm certain that it could happen. I think that one of the biggest title issues that I wrote it down to make sure that I got it. Okay. So one of the biggest things that happens is there's a lot of companies out there that try to trick people, right? So we talk about this in closing, like with everyone. And that is that you're going to get letters in the mail that say, hey, get a copy of your deed, get a copy of this, get a copy of that. And it's going to happen all the time. Everything that's recorded is public information that you can go get yourself, right, Nicole? Like you don't have to pay for that.
Correct.
And you can even call your title officer that closed your property and say, hey, can you get me a copy of this? Or does it automatically get sent to them after a certain amount of time?
It's supposed to be sent to the homeowner after the document's been recorded.
Yeah.
Most title companies, I think, are very good about sending them out. But there's always that chance that something got lost in the mail or, whatever. Right.
Especially nowadays, you might not get it ever. So then, but I guess the point that we're trying to cover in that is that there's not going to be anybody that you're going to have to pay after the fact.
Never a copy of a deed. Never pay.
But I promise you, you will get letters saying for $50, $75, $85, we'll get you a copy of your deed right away. So I don't know anybody that doesn't get those letters. They come out. That's going to happen. So beware and do not buy into that because it's not a legit cost that you have to incur to get a copy of that. What is Nicole? What's your? I'm sorry.
They already paid for it. It's called settlement.
You already paid for it,
right?
Yeah,
you got it.
Paid for it.
Nicole, what is your scariest story?
The Alta
you have a receipt.
Is your receipt.
Yep. Yeah. And we can talk about the Alta, honestly, because the Alta is the closing document that goes to your tax provider. It's got everything you need on it. You just hand it to your accountant and say, hey, here's my Alta. And that's it. That year that you buy a house, you need to make sure your accountant gets that. And when you go to closing and you're signing the papers, your title officer is going to go over that document with you front to back, every line of it. If they're not, stop them and ask them to do it.
Yes.
Nicole, I can tell you, and John, you can probably back me up on this. Nicole is going to make sure that when you're sitting down with her at closing, that you understand literally every dime that's going out. It's going to be reviewed. You're going to understand exactly what you're doing, what you're paying, who's getting what. And it's all disclosed to you very clearly on that document. Some attorneys or title officers just kind of go, I sent this to you yesterday. Did you get a chance to review it? Are you okay with the numbers? Like, that is not what I'm looking for. And I will, in closing, if it's not Nicole, because I know she's going to go through it, but I will, in closing, say, if you don't mind, can you please review line to line with my client so that they understand what they're doing? You know, I mean, I guess given this podcast, you guys can imagine how important it is for me for people to actually know what they're doing.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, have you run into people that are just trying to like get through the Alta and not even give you the time, or what is your opinion?
So I actually have a client in York, Pennsylvania. She's with Coldwell Banker. They have an in-house title company that
it's so scary, guys. It is a very hard thing to get up at the settlement table and say, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sign this. However, it is your last defense before you go to closing. So if there's something out of line, what we do as realtors is we do a walkthrough, usually in the morning before settlement. The reason I like to do them the same day as settlement is because, you know, the window might break the night before. There might be a flood the night before. What if the water heater? Yeah, like what if the water heater explodes? So, you know, we like to do the walkthrough right before.
You need a boat in the basement.
You need a boat, right? You don't need to bring your rubber duckies. Don't pack the rubber duckies.
Bring your hip waders.
Or somebody broke into the house. I mean, anything could happen at any given time.
Yeah.
You could go there and the thing's burnt down and you just bought it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the house could be gone and you just bought it. So doing the walkthrough is just super important, as close to closing as you possibly can. And if you find something that's missing, and John, we've done this a million times, you find something that's missing, it is the last time you get to say, hey, yeah, I'm not buying this. You just tore up the wall when you moved your refrigerator out, or there's a big scratch on the floor where they drug out the couch or the stove or the refrigerator, God only knows what. We've run into situations, John, we talked about this in another podcast, that between the time of putting the offer on and going to closing, the pipes were stolen. Like, literally, the copper pipes were stolen in between the time that we went under contract and that they bought the house. So buyers, if your agent is not expressing the walkthrough, you know, no, you want to walk through right before closing to make sure that the house is exactly as it should be. Because once you sign those documents in Maryland or Pennsylvania, you own that property, period. Yeah. And all the mistakes that happened.
I had a move out nightmare.
Okay, share.
I want to say 2005.
Okay.
First time buyer.
Wow.
Property was located in Baltimore County, not far from Social Security Administration.
Okay.
And we were supposed to do a walkthrough first thing in the morning.
Yep.
And the seller was supposed to move all her possessions out the night before, because she was moving to Cecil County, which is way up the road.
Yeah.
So we get to the house and she hasn't moved a thing. And she's saying that the mover who was supposed to come yesterday afternoon was overbooked and was coming this morning.
Yeah, and do
So
they mind if you come back and get all your stuff, right? Like that's the next
oh
question.
no, I have one of those too. No, that's not where this is going.
Yeah.
So my buyer client was a nurse, and this was her day to not only close, but also to move in from the apartments around the corner.
Oh gosh.
So um, we waited around 45 minutes, an hour. Now I'm calling the listing agent. What's going on? He's like, I don't know. It's the first time I ever heard of it. You know, I didn't know what's going on with our move out schedule, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I said, what do you want to do? And she's
Yeah.
like, I need to move today. I work tomorrow, 12-hour shift. I need to move today. So the seller says, well,
Mhm.
while I'm waiting for them to come all the way down from Cecil County, we can go over and do the paperwork, and then I'll come back and they'll move me out.
Uh,
Well, like that much of that is true. So
Yeah.
we went, came back, waited, right?
Hours.
Yep. They show up. They're moving like crazy. My girl says, I'm going to go back to my apartment while they pack up, finish packing up, and I'll come back. Well, I mean, I can't stand there for 12 hours, right?
Right.
So she comes back. She calls me in tears, right?
They took everything.
They destroyed the place moving out.
Yeah.
oh gosh.
When the hall going down the stairs, I think 50% of the drywall was removed because their furniture was so big. They just like cut stuff out and moved out.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
In the basement, have you ever seen those big interior inside palm trees?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about? It's got like the
Yeah.
canopy. This
Yeah.
thing was huge.
They left it.
Oh no, they watered it, watered it, watered it, watered it, watered it, watered it. So
Uh,
inside the inside planter, the decorative one, was all that stagnant crap water, sap
oh.
water. Guess what they did? They picked the tree up, knocked it over. We got swamp water all over the carpet, right?
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So, I mean, she's taking pictures. She's sending to me. She's in tears. She's crying. Love this. Call the listing agent. Guess what his response was? Well,
Oh
you
well.
signed. You
You
signed.
signed the paperwork. Yep.
I
Now
Oh,
said,
who strikes it all?
dude, you need to call your client and tell her she needs to make an insurance claim. Right? He's
Yeah.
like, he goes, I'm not getting involved.
And honestly, as nice as I am and as nice as I try to be and as focused as I try to be, that listing agent has absolutely zero responsibility. They represented
They
the
don't.
seller.
They
I
don't.
mean, sadly, they cannot and probably will not do anything to
Nope.
make that right. There's just
Nope.
nothing they can do. So when you sign the documents before the walkthrough, this is why this walkthrough is so important,
Right.
because once that title switches, and in Maryland and Pennsylvania, when you sign, you get the key. It's
Yeah.
not like in North Carolina, and the only reason I know North Carolina is because I got licensed there too. The money has to be like put into escrow, and then it has to go through the process. So you do not get keys until it's actually recorded.
So
So
back to Maryland,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So this is one of the reasons why I'm adamant about my particular title partners.
It is super important for the title company that's chosen that you have a solid relationship, because I know from working with Sue for so long, if I run into a situation where we start settlement and I don't have the lender's funds, that's always the very first thing that I'll announce to everybody. Look, we're
Right.
going to move forward. I don't have the lender's funds just yet, but I'm not too concerned. And I explain the process about, how that little holdup can happen. Or conversely, if there's a funding process, I'll make that known in advance. Like, hey,
Right.
I'm going to have to send back certain documentation before the lender releases the funds for us to disperse. So
yeah,
just a matter of being on board and everybody communicating.
So in a
right.
past life, I spent 20 years doing mortgages.
Ah,
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people that are going to listen to this podcast remember the bubble bust of 2005,
Yeah.
right? I
yep.
do. And I had 3 transactions that were approved. We signed. They never funded.
Wow.
Never
Because your
funded.
mortgage companies went out of business.
Right. So
That day.
when the title company tells me, hey, the lender requires docs to fund, I say, why are you telling me at the table?
Yeah. Yeah.
I should.
We,
I
I
tell
don't know.
my title company, ask them, do you table fund?
Right. I don't know. We've ran into that though, Nicole, where the documents had to get approved before they would release the money.
Yeah.
You get the clear to close. So so guys, in real estate, there is a those 3 words, clear to close, really are like, you can buy your house now, you can get excited now, you can go to closing now. Like all of that comes around with that statement, clear to close, meaning title's done, loans done, money's been sent. All this stuff is in process. But there are a few lenders out there that are going to make you send them the documents to review before they
Yes.
will release the money. In that
Right.
situation, I don't know of a time ever, Nicole, that you haven't told me that beforehand and
Correct.
also expressed that to the buyer, that
Correct.
this settlement might take an extra hour or so because we have to send the documents in to be able to release the money. Now, you already have the money in your possession at that time, right? 90% of the time, you just can't release it.
Correct.
No.
90% of the time, there is one particular mortgage lender. I can remember the loan officer's name, but I can't remember the company he's
No
with.
names.
Okay, we don't want to use names
No
anyway.
names. No names.
No
There's
names.
one particular lender I know that still operates. They don't even send me their loan money until after docs are signed and I fax everything back to them. Once
Yeah.
they look through the documents and approve them, then they will send the funds wired over so I can disperse.
So I'm officially on record. That's a no bueno for me and my seller. No bueno.
No
We
bueno
won't
for John. He
capitulate.
does
We
not
won't
want that lender.
participate.
I'll think of who the lender is, John, and I'll let Sue know and she can pass it on. So that way, if you're getting a pre-approval from that lender, you
You'll
can go.
know.
I have my own list. I have my own list. It's called the no-no list.
They're going to
The
go on
no-no
John's
list.
no-no list,
There-
right? Nope, that's
My
John's
list is
no-no
already
list.
beat. Yeah, no, this is ridiculous. It's like,
Yeah.
this isn't the dark ages. We're not chiseling out the deed.
Correct.
Yeah.
You
know, when
listen,
you're,
I had to tell a seller. I
yeah.
had to tell a seller who left and who was driving to another state. You
Oh,
don't have
gosh.
any money. She's
Right.
like, well, will I get money later? Nope.
Yeah. I mean, people have to understand that we know that we are taking your time when you have to come to closing and you're excited and you have a mover that's coming. Sometimes people try to close the same day that they're moving. I mean, I've had people in a rental truck driving their rental truck to closing, right?
Yep.
How many times has that happened, Nicole? And
Right.
all of their stuff is in the truck in the parking lot because they had to get out of their house and they have to get into the next one. So when something doesn't happen at closing, it can be really bad. That rental truck can be at the hotel for the night. We get it. You guys have to know ahead of time that there's some basic things that you need to know. And one of those things is, if you can give yourself a day or two, do it, right? Like if you can give yourself a day or two after closing to get out, or if you can give yourself a day or two to get out before closing, then absolutely, by all means, do it. If you have to be out of your property, it happens. You have a 9 o'clock closing on your sale. That money gets wired at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock to the next title officer. And then that title officer's taking the money from your proceeds and you're closing that afternoon. Does that make sense to you guys? Like, am I talking in circles? Did you understand what I'm saying?
It makes sense in theory only.
In theory, right. It's very difficult to do. And there are times it's necessary, but
your client who's buying and selling
Yes.
is not the only client buying and selling.
Yeah, exactly.
The house they're selling has a buyer.
Yep.
Eventually, the house that buyer's buying is a seller.
Has a seller. Yep.
And
Yep.
so what was supposed to be a 3 o'clock closing with your stuff in the parking lot is now a 7:30. And guess what? After a certain time, ain't no wire.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you guys wait until the last day, and we ran into this, we've talked about it on other podcasts. If you wait to the last day to do an extension, and all of us as realtors do it, we wait because these lenders, once you give them 2 weeks, they take that 2 weeks. If you give them 5 days, they take that 5 days. So you need to say, a week ahead of time to everyone, look, we're not going to extend this unless we have to, but it looks like we might need an extension. Like that's a
Right.
very common thing. And buyers beware, you don't want to settle if you have any questions on what is going on that property. John had his son show up to his house that he had under contract, and I think it was a foreclosure, right? Or bank owned, estate sale, something like
It was
that.
an estate sale. Yeah.
And the condenser was gone. The HVAC condenser was stolen.
Gone.
So
Well, no,
yeah.
that was actually, we were fortunate in that one.
Oh, okay. It was something else?
That was a flipper, right?
Okay, right.
And the flipper
Yep.
didn't watch his property, and so we actually showed up for our showing, and they gave me permission to show it. It was on a combo. We
Yeah.
opened the door and flipped the light switch. Nothing.
No power, no nothing. Right.
I call the agent, right? It's been on the market 40 days. No lie, 40, 50 days, right?
Right.
I said, you're active on the market. There's no power. And she's like, let me call him, right? In the
Yeah,
meantime,
let me call him.
in the meantime, my son just got off work. He's like, Dad, we'll just use our phones. So we got our phones all lit up.
Yeah.
Going through the property, right? And it looks nice, but it is pitch dark, right?
Yeah.
And
You can't
so
see it. Yeah.
he says, I really like it. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? He says, well, I mean, I think it's a good buy. It says the roof's new, siding's new, windows, kitchen, flooring, all that stuff, right? So we put in an offer, right? I said, this offer is contingent upon a reinspection. You got no power, right?
Right.
So I get a phone call a couple days later, says, well, the seller lives on the Eastern Shore in Cambridge, but he'll assure that the power's on, right? So we go back in our little window and power's on, right? And we're looking around, and now we start seeing some stuff. But the most glaring was when my son looked out the slider to the right where the air conditioning condenser was 3 days ago. It's gone.
Yeah, and when you're doing your walkthrough, people, you still got to go outside and look, because we walk into the house, we're looking for broken windows, we're looking for any damage, we're looking at the pipes, we're just trying to see. And that condenser's outside. There could be, God only knows out there. I mean, trash. How many times do we go to a house where the shed's still full? You know what I mean? People, they forget that their stuff's in the shed, right?
Or the attic
is jam-packed.
Or the attic, exactly. Yeah, like they moved out everything except the shed and the attic.
Right.
And you go in there, and literally, if you go to that closing table and you sign that paper, guess what? You own that shed and everything in it. You own that attic and everything in it, whether it's trash or not, is irrelevant. If that seller calls and says, oh my gosh, we left all the stuff in the attic, we didn't realize. Sorry. I mean, sorry, it's ours now.
Right.
That's the reality. Legally, it's theirs now. You signed, you gave the keys. It's no longer your property. And that includes everything you left in it.
So I have that second story to that, where if somebody lost their possessions.
Yeah, it's really, really important that people understand it. And Nicole, how many times, like 25% of the time, lenders are like, sorry, we're going to need an extension.
Absolutely.
I mean, sorry,
40,
we need more
last
time.
year, 40% of my listings did not close on time.
sorry, we need an extension. And you know what? Here's the thing. That extension means that person could renegotiate the whole deal. Or they could say, no, we're not going to extend. They could have a backup offer that's sitting there. And that happened to me 2 years ago, a year ago, with that PA buyer that I won't mention. But literally, buyers, you have invested all the money into to your inspections. And if it's a well and septic, that's $1,000 right there. If it's a single family house, it's probably somewhere in the lines of $500 to $600 for the inspection money. And then you've got, right, and that's for a regular size house. Then you've got termite, you've got like your appraisal. So you're $2,000 in before you go to closing, and that lender says, oh, sorry, we didn't get clear to close in time. We need to extend. Nope. Sorry, seller doesn't have to do it.
Right.
That's a really, really important thing to know when you're picking your lender or title officer. I mean, we've seen it in title. I can tell you Lakeside's never needed an extension for me. How often do you guys need an extension, Nicole?
It's very rare in title. It's all lender.
It never
it's all lender.
Yeah, it's all lender. All lender related.
It's all lender.
Yeah. Now, there are times where the lender doesn't work hand in hand with the title company. And then the title company comes back and says, the lender didn't give me this information. So again, you know, I've been surprised in previous years when I call Nicole and say, did you get my contract? And she's like, no. And now I send the contract to Nicole. You know what I mean? I used to just let the lender, you know, you get it to the lender contacts the title company. They need the information from the title company. So it was just like nothing I had to do. And that was when I was working specifically, you know, primarily with one or two lenders. And they just knew that they were going to send it. They were going to get it from Nicole. And then you let this outside source in and they're like, oh, well, we thought you would do that. And you know what I mean? So it's very easy. Exactly. It's very easy for these things to happen. And you call the title officer, they're hiring an abstractor. They're hiring, you know, somebody to go and record this information. They have to pull up the previous deed. It's not an overnight process to get title through.
Right.
You guys usually need about 2 weeks, right? Sometimes less, sometimes more.
Yeah. In Maryland, I can do it in about a week. Pennsylvania's 2 weeks.
Yeah. So Nicole, I'm going to share a story. And you're going to remember this story because it was like a mind blow one. I believe it was your company. I worked with the seller. So I still think it was through you, but the buyer came in to purchase this property. I might've worked with the buyer. I don't remember, but in the situation, the seller had co-signed for her son in Ocean City. It was you, right? You remember? This old lady, God bless her heart.
Taxes.
It was taxes.
Yes.
Her husband had passed away and she didn't file taxes on her own for 2 or 3 years, right? And she went to sell her house. And when she did, you know, we had to find the taxes, but worse yet, it was the son who defaulted on his mortgage and she had co-signed for him.
Yes.
So we had to get the attorneys involved, John. It was so bad. It was the saddest thing ever. This lady, the attorneys took 100% of her proceeds, 100%, and said they would pay her after whatever was left.
And that's a good point. We talked in the beginning of the podcast about buying property when you're not married, about how you hold title and how, you know, judgments could affect what you're talking about is something no one ever thinks about. Parents often are asked to co-sign loans for their kids. Parents often are the property owners. You don't think about the fact that my son is not on my deed. I'm just going to co-sign a loan for him to get his own house.
Yeah.
Well, because you've obligated yourself to a mortgage, if your child defaults, they're going to file a judgment against all the mortgage owners, which not only affects that house that your son bought, it affects any real property that you own too.
Yeah, and we're talking, I mean, Nicole, I don't remember exactly what the number was, but I think it started with a 2. It was like $200,000
It was a
these
boatload.
attorneys took. Now, God knows, I mean, the IRS got involved. They tried helping out because there was a couple issues. These issues popped up. Nicole found all of them, and we figured it out at the end of the day. But this poor woman had to literally get $0 from the sale of her lifetime home that she was supposed to walk out with 200 and some thousand. She
That
got
was
zero.
free and clear, no mortgage.
Free and clear.
Yeah.
Yep. She got nothing because her son had a house in Ocean City and defaulted his loan. So she had to pay all of his back mortgage money, pull him out of foreclosure. He was already in foreclosure. It was pre-foreclosure, and pay all the taxes. I mean, literally it was so bad that I hope she got some money back, but I know that they were taking everything from her.
Yeah.
And then they were going to give her the balance after they took all their money, lawyers included.
2 cents.
You know. Yeah, I don't know what she got back. But, before you put your name on something, think long and hard about it, because this is why we're doing this, to make sure that you know what you're doing. I mean, it's very easy to sign for your kid's car, right? Like my name's on my son's car. We wanted him to establish credit. He was 8, 19, you know what I mean? Had a job, was paying his own car payment, but he couldn't buy it on his own. So, I co-signed for him, of course. That worst case scenario is I'm paying the $15,000 loan, right? We're not talking 15, add a couple zeros or add, $100,000 to that. Easy.
No, so it actually gets worse than that.
Oh, no.
Yes, it does.
Uh-oh.
So if your name's still on that vehicle, take note. So said young person is on their way to work.
Yeah.
And traffic is bad and they're in a hurry.
Yep.
And they rear end another car with 4 people in the car.
Yeah.
Right. And as it turns out, the way the insurance was set up, they file a judgment.
Yeah, it's going against both of us.
Yep.
Well, I am the mother that will go down with the ship. You know what I mean? Like the ship is my kids. If they go down, I go down. Like now that is on a car.
Right.
I love my children. I'm not signing for their homes. I've seen way too much of this to put my name on a mortgage. Sorry, not happening.
So to jump off that, think long and hard. This whole title thing. Before I tell the story about the guy who lost all his possessions.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer out there and you may or may not be following the whole NAR thing and the lawsuit.
Right.
Just what we've explained in just, I don't know, about an hour, you're going to go it alone. Good luck.
Good luck.
Oh, yeah.
Good luck.
Good luck. I mean, so John is going to kick me in the mouth for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. You need a buyer agent much more than you need a listing agent. Sorry, you need both, but you can put a for sale by owner sign in your yard, and you can go and agents will find you, buyers will find you, and you can sell your house on your own. The buyer's agent is going to know how to handle the transaction in its entirety. They're not going to represent you, certainly, but as a buyer, you cannot, and I mean, you can, legally, you can do it. You could also jump off the top of a building. It's not a wise thing to do, but you could do it.
You could do it.
I mean, right. You are putting so much on your plate. There's a reason realtors get their license and don't continue doing this. And it's because you got to have some thick skin.
Yeah.
And you've got to be willing to go to battle with other agents and with other people. And you've got to have a team behind you. I can't, if you took my team away, my network of people, right, I would be lost. You know what I mean? Like I would be lost. It takes a village to buy a house. And if you think that you can do it on your own, Nicole, how many buyers do you see come in unrepresented?
I would say 20% of my transactions are unrepresented clients. And the biggest,
It's
the
horrible.
biggest thing that
Crazy.
it's tough because they get into situations, they want to ask me. I can't tell them
Can't give them
anything.
the
I'm
answer.
not an agent. I've got no clue.
Yep. Yep.
I didn't know there was 20% of the people out there willing to take that much drugs to do it.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I mean, right. The, can you imagine? I mean, you can't, we're just giving you these podcasts. This is the 10th one, by the way. Congratulations, John. This is our 10th episode.
Awesome,
Yay.
you guys. Congrats.
Yeah. We 10th episode, and look at the difference from our first episode. Sorry guys for our previous videos. You know, it's like we've learned how to use lighting a little better, and you know, I'm centered now. Everybody was like, Sue, you're sitting to the left, you're sitting to the right. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. So we're learning. Anyway, long story short, when you take on a purchase like this and you are going in alone, good luck. You're right, John. Good luck.
Good luck. Good luck.
I mean,
So do you want to hear about the poor gentleman that lost his possessions?
I do. I
Yeah.
want to hear.
Okay.
Tell us.
So, you know, you guys all know this. There's this thing called a short sale.
Oh Lord. Yep.
And I used to be pretty good in those. I'm glad I'm
Me too.
retired.
I did a lot of them.
Retired. Anyway, got a call from a gentleman. He got my name from somebody. I don't remember if it was the attorney or somebody else who knew me. And I had to counsel him through the short sale phase. And, you know, he tried it. First of all, he wanted to tell me that he's asking his lenders to modify his balances so that he can sell his house with equity. I said, that will not work.
Yeah.
They don't modify balances. They may modify payments, but it's not their balance to modify. So that was the first hurdle. Second hurdle.
Oh, okay, right.
Second hurdle was until you apply for a modification, they will not approve a short sale.
Okay, so before you go any farther, John, what John is saying about a modification, just to make this simple, is he's saying that in a short sale, the seller is going to the bank and saying, I need to sell my house, but it's not worth what I owe on it. So we need you to modify the amount that I owe,
which they will
in
not
order,
do.
right, where they're not going to do that, but they will in some situations accept less if they have a contract, that contract's been presented. That's a short sale, basically.
Correct. But the thing is, when we talk about modification, what we're really talking about is payment modification,
Payment,
not principal curtailments, which is
like you want to keep the house, right?
So thank God his lender, so first and second, it was through the same entity, and so I told him, you got to fill all his paperwork out, you got to submit it. Let me know what stuff they're sending you. He would email me stuff. They're sending me this. I said, okay, it means this, means this, means this. Finally, he says to me, I got the letters. They've approved the short sale, first and second. I said, I'll be right over to get copies. I go over, I look at the copies, I take them. I said, now you can sell your house. And at that point, he was done.
Right.
I had a couple off the record conversations, which I will not repeat in this type of situation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I basically told him, here's some things you can do. Be prepared. You're going to sell the house. You're going to move. He's like, you know what? I just want to go back to Atlanta because this whole thing is so stressful to me. I just want to move home. I said, fine. So the kicker was we're under contract. Everything looked good. Ended up with a little bit more than the list price. Looked like he was actually, even after, you know, they would give him a little bit of money, right? He was hoping they would give him, I forget what it's called, Nicole, but he wanted a parting gift. And they had agreed originally to give him a parting gift, right? Then they asked him at the end, we need your updated financial information. Look at Nicole's, look at Nicole's face. So somehow or another, I'm not sure how, but $35,000 showed up in his bank account.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know where the money came from. And in this setting, I can't even say where it did.
It came from him not paying his mortgage. It came from him saving his mortgage money. I mean, I don't know. So I'm saying from
Okay.
the outside,
Okay.
chances are people just stop paying their mortgage.
So, the lender wanted to renegotiate that little
course they
parting gift, which would
Yeah.
have paid for the move out, the storage, the U-Haul, the transportation, the whole
Yeah.
relo, right?
Yep.
That goes away. And we're like a week from closing. I said, we had a conversation in the beginning. I told you what not to do.
Yep.
Obviously, you either didn't believe me or you
Yep.
ignored me, right? Whatever you did it. I didn't do it, right? So he decides at the last minute, since I'm not getting the money, I'm not moving out, right? I said, what are you doing, dude? You're free to go. You're free to go. We've been on this for 6 months.
Leave now.
You're free to go. So the buyer comes over, right, with his agent, and they're like wanting to do a walkthrough. She calls me up. What the hell's going on? He won't let us in the house. I said, what are you talking about? He won't let you in the house. I call him up. I said, look, I said, the buyer has really deep pockets and he's prepared to sue you. And I believe he has the ammunition to do so.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they, buyer and seller, agree in the driveway to what would be acceptable, right? I'm not there. I'm like, whoa, this has got TNT written all over it.
Right.
I don't want to blow up, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So I'm in the office like, what are you guys doing? What are you doing, right? So he goes and signs. Oh, so the before he signs, the buyer says, I have a company. I'm going to make a call. I'm going to get you a truck and I'm going to get you 5 guys and they're going to come over and help you move out. You're going to go secure a storage locker right now. Get the biggest one, get 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever you got to do. Yeah.
Because your stuff's on the street as of today.
Right.
So it didn't really end that day. So about 2.5 days later, right, I'm still getting phone calls. Had moved out. Some of the stuff's still in there, right? And I'm calling him. I'm like, dude, move out. And he's like, well, the guy only helped me on Friday. Now, I'm having a hard time finding out. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, get a call Sunday. I guess he had left and the buyer had watched him leave, going to the storage unit. He and the locksmith changed the locks on the house.
Wow.
Yep. Look at Nicole's look. Yep. Because at that time, the buyer was the lawful owner.
Right.
So he comes back, goes to use his garage opener. No go.
Doesn't work. Yeah. So guys.
Anyway.
Yeah.
He lost about 60% of his possessions.
Yeah. The key is when you go to closing and you sign those papers, you now have no legal right to be in that property.
None.
You're a squatter at best. At best, you're a squatter.
Yep.
You're really trespassing. Honestly, if you have gone and you have signed the paperwork, you can't go to court and say, I changed my mind. I just signed the papers at 3:00, but I wanted to stay. So I went back home. No judge is going to allow that to happen. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not pretending to be, but you're taking all this on. Foreclosure is a real thing, guys. And I will tell you that I had an investor that purchased a property, and when he purchased it, they left anything and everything in the property, and they said, we're not coming back. Like the owner had left everything there. And so we went in there, and by the time, it was like rats in the street. Sorry if I sound offensive or whatever, but by the time we were bringing stuff out of the house and putting it, the sheriff had come to watch, because you can't just legally put everybody's stuff on the street. You got to actually have a sheriff that the judge says, yep, this foreclosure is legit. They're going to give you the paperwork. You can go and you can remove those items and stick them on the street. Literally, you cannot leave them on your property because that person cannot come back to your property. So they're on the curb. There were people out there with bags waiting and taking literally everything we were bringing out of the house.
Wow.
Right. There were drug users in the house. This is in Westminster. There were drug users in the house. So the seller and I were trying to like bag up the trash, and we just kept finding needle after needle. So he was like, look, we're not doing this. He walks outside to these people that are like digging through the trash, right? Or these people's
Right.
possessions,
Come on in.
you know. And he said, look, I'll give anybody $50 cash if you help me clean this property out. Well, 3 or 4 of these drug guys, users, whatever, were like, absolutely. They went in there. We're like, be careful. There's needles, make sure you're looking at what you're doing. They didn't care. That place was empty in like an hour. We had everything out on the street. You would think, right, you would think that there'd be like this mound of stuff out on the street. No, it was gone. Even the food from the freezer was taken.
Oh my
God.
God.
They took old pots and pans, and like you would have thought you were at a garage sale by people lining up and taking everything. So just know that this stuff happens. I mean, it absolutely happens. Not to get off title. Sorry, Nicole. John and I have a habit of pulling other stories in, but
it's all title related. I mean,
it's all title. Yeah, it's all title related.
Take title in different forms. There's different types of transactions.
Right.
There's standard sales, which we all love because everybody leaves happy.
Everybody's happy. Yeah.
And then there's short sales where usually one person's happy. And then there's foreclosures where nobody's happy. And then there's foreclosures that the bank won't remove the stuff. And so you have to buy it as is, where is, and that's the way it is.
Yeah. Now, Nicole, how many times, and John, this is a good topic because it affects everybody. It affects title, it affects the lenders, it affects the agents, everybody's involved in this. A foreclosure, right? Mm-hmm. And the buyer goes in, and the seller, I had it happen. The seller, when they got foreclosed on, got angry, went into the house and took dumbbells like you would hold in your hands, and broke legitimately every piece of drywall that they could get. Sure. They had to have climbed on a ladder to get some of the drywall that was higher up. Mm-hmm. They took concrete and put it in the pipes. Yep. So now, now you're selling, the bank is selling that house as is, where is, right? They are saying they don't have a disclaimer because they don't have to do anything, right? But that use and occupancy, how does that process actually happen on the title side of things, Nicole? Like, if there's no use and occupancy, can you close it?
Well, so a UNO is usually only an issue if it's new construction.
Right.
I've never
seen...
But
how do they... Like in this situation, I think it just closed. I don't think it mattered.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean,
right?
Yeah. Once it's foreclosed on and there's any kind of damage, it's sold exactly as it is. You don't have to refile for a UNO or anything like that.
Okay.
Right. But imagine if that damage was done after you're under contract. Like, it changes everything.
It does.
Just ask for a refund, move on.
Yeah, I mean, people do crazy stuff, guys. Yeah. I guess this just goes back to reassuring you that you need 100% to do a walkthrough, and you need to back the hell out if damage has been done to the property. Yeah. You do not have to buy something. In the contract, clearly it states that the property has to be in the condition on the day of closing as it was on the day of the offer.
Right.
So
I find that, and again, this is like investor 101. The investor doesn't care because it's all getting ripped out, down to studs, all the plumbing, all the electric, whatever.
Yeah, in most situations.
If you're a buyer and you're saying, ooh, I'm going to wheel and deal, and I'm going to get a good deal.
Yeah.
And you decide that you're not going to do any types of inspections before you close, and then your $20,000 budget's now $100,000, and you don't have the money. I see those too.
Yes.
Yep. Happens. So I think there was one more question.
I have a question that I want.
Okay, go ahead, John. Let me find it on mine.
So we talked earlier before we started about mechanics liens.
Yes.
Okay.
So please help us out.
To explain what they are?
Yeah, what they are, where they kind of come from, how generally they get solved.
Mechanics liens happen if you have vendor come out, put a new roof on your house, new siding. If you have anyone come to your property to do any type of work, the vendor's going to present you with an invoice at the end of the job. If that invoice does not get paid, that vendor has a right to file what's called a mechanic's lien. It is a lien against the property for the amount that was on the invoice, plus any appropriate collections and attorney's fees. Mechanics liens are going to operate very similar to a mortgage until it is paid off and fully released, so that there's no outstanding lien. It's going to be a headache for you to deal with. Mechanics liens are very, very tricky. When it comes to settlement. If I'm selling my home, as a part of the settlement, I had to have a new roof put on. If I have reported to my new buyers, I've paid the invoice, it's all taken care of, don't worry about it. If no one ever asserted that they wanted to see the paid receipt, if I really didn't pay it and walk away from that house and move out of the country, never to be seen again, the buyer is now responsible for the mechanics lien that occurred as a result of my not paying the invoice.
Right.
So they can be problematic.
Time and time again, we get non-paid receipts. We get invoices. And so we, as agents, when we provide the list of repairs, right, we're supposed to be given all the invoices, all the receipts showing that this work was done by a licensed professional.
And paid.
Now buyers, here we go again. You know, you're going to take that on yourself to say, hey, look, I'm the buyer. I don't have an agent. I don't want to be represented. You're going to have to make sure that that is not an invoice, but a paid receipt. If it does not say paid, whatever you're buying on that mechanics lien, it becomes your responsibility.
Yes.
Basically, if it's there, it needs to be done. And that can be sneaky because these liens could go on maybe like the day before closing or right at the same time. And it's just a mix in timing.
Absolutely.
And said seller who decided you didn't want to pay it in hopes they would under the rug.
Now I have a
They're not going to negotiate a lower balance than the lien.
Correct.
I have often wondered about this, and I don't think it's something that I'm 100% certain on. So Nicole, let's say they didn't pay their taxes. You're going to know that, and it's not going to close, right? Or is that something that could get transferred to the buyer?
No.
If the seller didn't pay the real estate taxes, you would know.
Well, I would know, yes.
Okay.
And so I guess I was thinking about our conversation before the podcast started with Baltimore City, but scratch that. Yes, I would know. There's no way that it could close with unpaid taxes.
So is a mechanics lien really pretty much the only thing that could pop up after the fact that the title company would not find?
Or if the seller wasn't very honest and they took out a home equity line of credit 2 days before settlement.
Right.
You know,
right.
That could happen.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Right. The things that could happen. Now, Nicole, you know this story. It wasn't me, but we worked for the same company and this story happened where the buyer's girlfriend came with the buyer's driver's license for the seller. Do you remember? So the title officer was sitting down with the seller and his wife, or who pretended to be his wife. And this gets into title insurance a little bit, which is why it's so important that we don't forget this element. Sometimes on these podcasts, I think about stuff after the fact and I go, oh man, I wish we would have brought that up while we had them. So this is important because every time you buy a house, whether it's with your agent or not, you need to make sure, in my opinion, that you buy title insurance for yourself. If you have a loan, chances are that lender's going to require it. And the lender's policy, but there's also an owner's policy. And that is going to cover you in the event that something happens. And in that situation, the girlfriend showed up to closing pretending to be the wife. And they were going to sell that house out from under the wife without her even knowing that she was signing. Luckily, the title attorney looked at the driver's license and was, how did that, do you remember? It wasn't you, but right? It wasn't you that caught that. It was Victor. And
yeah,
right. And he was like, yeah, I need another form of ID or something. And she got up and left and never came back.
Yep.
Like, right? Isn't that like she got up and left because he called her out? And it was the girlfriend signing for the wife, acting like she was the wife. So in that situation, what would happen, Nicole? The wife would come to you and say, I didn't sell my house.
Yeah, the deed. So if that really went through and the deed were recorded, the wife would come forward and the deed would actually be nullified. So the buyers, if they did not have title insurance, the buyers would not only lose the house, they would lose all the money that they spent on the house.
Correct. Like, think about that, guys. The title insurance is a one-time fee you pay at closing. Owner's title insurance, it's not a monthly fee. It's not put into your mortgage. You're not paying for it. You're paying for it one time at closing, and it's going to cover you forever. So what's another example that you've run into? I mean, I know that one was probably far and few between, but it happened. We know when it happened. And luckily it was caught and it didn't go through. But if it did, that buyer would have been up the creek if they didn't have title insurance. So what other scenario?
I've got plenty. So
right. It happens.
Here's one from an investor standpoint.
Okay.
We actually have a file now. The purchaser did not want to buy title insurance. He was investing in a property. He was buying it from a friend. It had been in the friend's family for some time. And it was side by side, a duplex that was converted over into one living space. And when they did the demolition to take down the partition wall in between the two units, they didn't pull a permit for plumbing. The buyer did not buy title insurance, and he was doing some home remodeling repairs himself and hired someone to come out and do some work. Well, it came out that there were no permits pulled for the existing plumbing. Now the city of Westminster has been notified, and they have deemed the property uninhabitable at the moment, and there is no recourse for the buyer. Had you had title insurance, those particular issues, as far as permits, they're covered. They're a covered thing under the title insurance. So remember, the thing about title insurance is it's an indemnification policy, meaning you get reimbursed what you lost. So in this case, the guy would get legal representation for free. He would get reimbursed for all expenses involved in fixing the existing plumbing issue, making sure that the permits were now pulled and active and everything was brought up to code. As it stands, the guy has an uninhabitable house and doesn't have the money to fix it. I have another instance.
Crazy.
Here's something, this happens all the time and people don't even think about it. Years ago, grandma had 10 acres. She has subdivided those 10 acres into 2 lots now. Gave 5 acres to one of her children. Her child now is going and selling it. Buyer elects not to buy title insurance. All right, it's your choice.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? When grandma subdivided her 10 acres, no one took into consideration that the property was on a well. The well was on grandma's lot. The other 5 acres that was subdivided out didn't have a source of water. So when it was sold to our buyer who didn't want title insurance, he's now finding out that he doesn't have his own private water source. Grandma's now ticked off, and she's done whatever it is she's done, so he doesn't have water at all. He
Wow.
can't file any claims. He's going to have to pay the money, have his own well drilled,
Yeah.
and he's out of
And he's
luck.
not going to be able to live in it until that's done, because you can't live in a house without water.
You got it.
So, I mean, guys, we're doing this podcast and talking openly so that you guys really hear and can share these stories with us. These are real active stories. There was one, Nicole, that we'll talk about, just that happened last year in Baltimore County. If you remember, the gentleman, all right, let me remember this. And I don't know if it ever, they resolved it, so it didn't go through title insurance. But
Propane tank, buried propane tank.
no, it was similar to that. It was oil. Am I remembering this correctly? It was an oil tank that was leaking.
Yeah.
And the
Say more.
seller told us, right, the seller told us that his painters must have put like the paint thinner or whatever into the sump pump because the water was turned off. Yeah, so they were using the sump kind of to get rid of the paint or whatever, clean their stuff up because the water was turned off. Whatever the case was, he came up with this whole story to explain, because the home inspector had said, what is this odor? There was this horrible odor, and it smelled like
with EPA issues.
Yeah, the environmental department showed up at his house. His neighbor had called. There was this dead grass outside. The neighbor had called and said she had reported it time and time again. But this buyer comes in, buys the house. He tells us this story about how it's paint thinner or whatever. And come to find out, it's actually the oil tank leaking into the sump, John. And the sump is expelling this oilish water out into the yard. And the whole neighborhood is now, under review or whatever you want to call it.
Hazmat zone.
He's calling, right. I mean, now the EPA is involved and groundwater and everything else. So he's calling, and Nicole's like, look, if it doesn't get cleared up through the seller, title insurance would have taken care of that. Or like at least helped out with it. We didn't have to file a claim, but that would have covered him. So before you say, no, thank you, I don't need that, you really do need to know that these are suggested to protect you against something that could happen that we just can't figure out. There's no way to figure that out.
I see a lot of these cases happen when friends and family are exchanging real estate.
Oh, God.
Are trusting in each other.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't trust anybody, period. Right. You can't trust anyone. Like, you just can't. Don't trust your brother. Nicole, is there any final words that you would like to leave for our listeners, whether it's a realtor, buyer, seller?
I would just say that investing in a home is the biggest purchase that you will ever make. And please do not discount that. Make sure that you're taking steps to protect your investment, whether that means hire the agent, make sure you're using a reputable lender, buy the title insurance policy, because what you save in the beginning is nothing compared to what you stand to lose on the back end when you try to take the shortcuts.
100%. John, how about you? Any closing?
Yeah. Like Nicole, I probably have 1,000 title related stories. Some of those are really juicy.
We could do a month of these. Honestly.
We could do title monthly. Seriously. Anyway, thank you, Nicole. Thank you for sitting in. It'll get shared with you. Share it. Yeah. And don't go it alone. You ain't got that much money. You ain't got that much money.
As always, we are here for you, buyers, sellers, realtors. You're not alone in this. We're here with you. It's a crazy market. It's a crazy time. Buyers, look, don't be scared, but do be scared if you're going to try to do this on your own. You need a realtor. Like, that's the last thing that you want to do, is try to do this on your own. So make sure you have a licensed, experienced professional that's going to be on your team, that's going to fight for you, and that's going to introduce you to the people that need to make sure that this goes through as successfully as possible. So as always, guys, thank you